So that's how we ended up at Mercury Racing.
And that was a seamless transition. You guys worked well under the Brunswick umbrella from there on.
I wouldn't say it was flawless. We did have some challenges along the way, and I'm open to talk about most of that. But
Sure.
at the same time they acquired my company, they were transitioning to a different president at Mercury, and I got a phone call from Jack Reichert, who was chairman of Brunswick at the time, and he was one of the reasons I agreed to sell, because he was the only guy that ever made an overture to try to mend fences with my father. So I respected him for taking that step, and he told me right away. He says, we're going to change to a different president, but don't worry, the deal will still go through. I said, okay, I don't care. That's fine. So it was David Jones that became the president, and the only issues that were significant with David, he was a little bit disorganized, and I wasn't real confident in his strategy. He was committed to two strokes and direct injected two strokes, and that was a good step in developing low emission engines. But it was only good for the first step, because there wasn't a way to make that technology viable long term. And I told David, I said, we're going to have a problem when the EPA tightens the emission rules on outboards. We're not going to be able to meet them with a two-stroke. We need to have four strokes. So I was pushing for four strokes until David finally said, shut up and support the strategy. Well, there's only one president, so I shut up, and we did our best with the Optimax. We at Racing had developed a higher pressure system, so we're actually making Optimax better. And that, I got a nice little plaque after David was gone and a new president was in. I got a nice little plaque for fixing Optimax. Our guys, and I didn't do it, the engineers at Racing did it. And they got a really nice way of making it work. And it worked so well that we thought, well, you know what? Let's take that onto the military side, because there was a mandate to get gasoline off the ships for the Navy. They didn't like having the dual fuels. So they wanted the gasoline gone. They wanted diesel or jet fuel. That was nothing. So let's try to see if we can break those little droplets in and spark ignite diesel. So we did. We had I think it was 90 PSI in the compressor. We beefed it up so it didn't break off, because Mercury had that problem with the compressors breaking off the mounts. And we had increased the pressure. We could break those little droplets, and then they were small enough that we could light them with the spark plug. And the guys over at Mainstream did a really cool thing. They put a little quartz window in the combustion chamber, and they actually shot movies in slow-mo of the fuel coming in, the air bursting the droplets into little tiny droplets, the spark going off, the flame front propagating, piston goes. So cool. I took that to Virginia Beach, where they had the multi-agency craft conference for the military, and I showed that in a presentation. I had also received commercial and government products as part of my portfolio, so I had the engines that we sold to the government. And then
was there still an oiling system with the diesel, or was it the diesel lubricating enough you didn't need an oiling system anymore?
We kept the oiling. We still had oil injection.
For all the bearings through the crankcase and everything like that.
The lubricity challenges with the different fuel, we weren't willing to take that risk. We were just happy we could spark ignite it, because that was a first. And then, of course, by then George Buckley was president of Mercury, and he gave me no end of crap because they had to have it by 2000. We hadn't sold an engine by 2001. We were still trying to sell them, and they were just not pulling the trigger, and it was frustrating as hell. George went to Washington, dragged us along. He was going to show us how to sell to the military. He came back a little sheepish, because the gal that he was talking to, she was a colonel or something and about to retire. All she wanted was a job. so he didn't sell anything either. So
Yeah.
I got to poke him a little bit with that, and then we came back, and then we had some prototypes that were down on a boat in Key West with the Navy down there, and one day they came back and they were pulling competitors' engines that had broken on one of their boats, and we were pulling them back with the prototypes, and they were, oh, that's really interesting. And then we went out again and brought back the second boat that had broken, again with our prototypes. And I think after the third boat, somebody said, you know, we ought to look seriously at those engines. That was when we finally broke through and began selling those engines. But it was kind of painful. And then we did a recreational version of the diesel as well for sale in Europe and places that gasoline was kind of hard to find. So that ended up being a success. But by then we had another new president. Buckley had gone down to be chairman at Brunswick, and they brought in another president who committed to 4-strokes. So we got a chance to do the original Verados, and Pat
Yeah,
Mackey
because there was a little bit of a transition there where there was Yamaha's branded as Mercury.
Mercahas.
Yeah, Mercahas. Yeah, I can remember taking the cowling off and goes, "This looks just like a Yamaha."
That's because it
still
was
has
a
all the
Yamaha.
stamps on it.
It was a way. It was a way to bridge the gap in our own development, and you know, it was a little bit of crow eating to do that. But you know, I don't feel too bad about that. You know, before I was part of the company, Yamaha was a supplier to Mercury. We actually contracted them to make engines. They weren't in the business. But our government's antitrust people said, Brunswick, you can't do business. Yamaha, so that lessens competition. They made us break the deal apart. So then Yamaha was in the business. That was Mercury taught them.
Otherwise, they would have just probably kept supplying you parts.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, Mercury Racing and Mercury Marine, Mercury Racing, especially in our world, is the 800-pound gorilla. Who was your biggest competitor back then? Was it Yamaha?
Well, when we were first into it, we were still fighting Evinrude with their Ficht.
Yeah.
And there was a saying going around: if you got Ficht, you got Ficht.
Yeah.
And then of course, when Brunswick canned David Jones went to Outboard Marine and was their president, and accelerated Ficht into the ground.
Yeah,
and,
that was the
bad.
end of them. Yeah, it was the end.
We weren't allowed to bid. Brunswick wanted to buy them because we could have kept the brands alive. We weren't even allowed to bid on it, and then Bombardier picked it up, but they didn't succeed with it either, and they ended up closing it, which was too bad.
Your whole idea of getting rid of the 2-stroke was an awesome idea for emissions because
but
you're feeding oil right into it. Yeah,
you got to have somebody willing to listen to you and willing to act on it.
Yeah,
and then you know the first Verados was challenged for Mercury Racing because the mainstream Mercury engineering people and marketing people, we'll never need a 300 horsepower outboard, you know. So they design limited it where we weren't able to get power to make a performance version. We finally did get a 300, but we had to reroute the air because they were bringing it across.
Had the scoop on the top. Yeah,
they were bringing the air across the power head, so it was all preheated, which lowers the air density, which means you can't put as much fuel in at a combustion ratio. So we struggled like hell. We ended up having to completely reroute it with that scoop to bring air in without having to bring it over the power head. And then we could massage it a little bit. We never could get it to run on normal fuel. We had to use high test, but we got 300, and it was okay. But it was a compromise at best. And then when Mercury started to do the new platform, it was kind of toward the end of my tenure. I was still there when we approved it. I was on the Product Action Committee, the PAC. I was a member of that, and was there to approve the next generation of 4-strokes for Mercury, and happy enough that I left a team in place that could carry on.
Yeah.
And so there we have the 450s, and then replaced by the 500s. So they did good work.
Well, my favorite, being a mechanic from the Optimax all the way through now, is the L6. I mean, obviously the 400 was my favorite because it made the most power, but every L6 that's ever been made, I've loved for the ease of working on it, for this, all of that, and just the longevity of the engine. I mean, it's one of my favorite engines of all time. But
Still to this day, Myrick.
yeah,
Go
still
ahead.
to this day. And me being a catamaran guy, the broad range of RPM is huge because it's like second gear. The small cubic inch being a 2.3 liter, you can really spin them up. Compared like right now with an older 400R, I still get 7,000 RPMs, and with the newer stuff, the 450, I'm at 6,450. 600, I get 6,600, 6,650. But it was nice having the broad RPM range.
Yeah,
So
that was a good engine for sure.
yeah,
And I loved it. I was already retired and visiting the Miami show, and I got out in some of the boats to go for rides, and I didn't care for the styling. I like it now, but I didn't like it at first. Took a while
yeah,
to get past. Of course, I was invested deeply in the alien cowl. That
yeah.
whole concept that
It's
came
still the coolest. The alien cowl is still the coolest looking
well,
engine.
that came directly from me. I literally was in with the styling department, cutting on wax to make
Wow.
moving the clay around, and then the guys at Mercury Racing surprised me when they chopped and channeled the cowl of the 300 to make the small block version, if you want to put it in those
Yeah,
terms.
you
And
might think I'm
that's
lying,
even
but today I put one of those alien cowls on, and I'm doing it with one hand and with the little just pull out knob on the front. I'm like, this thing, it probably weighs 8 pounds compared to 40 pounds of a cowl of nowadays.
yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, it's so cool.
I was really proud of that. I put that in the checkbox of some of my most successful impositions on the styling department
Yeah,
because they were going to make it just like a mainstream cowl. So we got a chance to do a
yeah,
new engine. Let's do a cowl that looks like it was born in this century.
yeah. With them big air intakes on the top, that thing is
Yeah,
bad.
and the air intakes they were lifted almost directly from the 2.5 liter race engines
Mm-hmm.
that were done back in the 90s. That little side cowl scoop was so damned efficient at getting air into the engine. I said, we're going to keep the concept, but let's put it here and style it a little bit. So if you look, it's a pretty close replica from the early race engines, and it
Wow.
worked like a champ.
Yeah.
We just made it look cool.
And there's just nice room around it too. And
Yeah.
when you're putting the cowling on, it's not like ripping every wire off of the cowling. And but nowadays, I mean, everything's packed in there so tight, and then with all the duct work to try to keep the water out, and the sound
Yeah.
in, which sound has made a big difference, I'm sure. But that and the Tower of Power, and then the cowlings back in the early 90s, the V6 that you could slide, literally open up the front hatch and then slide it off and just lift it off and sit it on the ground with the two pegs in the back of the engine.
Yeah.
That was the coolest, even though, we were constantly working on switch boxes and all that stuff and stators. And, but I mean, I tell the guys in the shop now, it takes two guys to get a cowling off nowadays. And I'm like, this used to be, I could have a whole cowling off of a boat all the way down to the midsection in 30 seconds, if not even that. So
the bad news was that you had to do that a lot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
My first week there, I learned, we have a problem with our 2.5. The cylinder liners are sinking in the block. Literally. And I thought, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Welcome to Mercury.
Yeah.
So I had to, we got it solved, but it was all hands in engineering to get that resolved. And so we can't put out an engine like that. We got to fix that. But it turned out, and I learned I had some engineers that were not very good as part of the Mercury organization, and we had some other issues that we had to deal with. There was some bad stuff going on I had to fix. So my first my first engineering exercise was to jump deep into two-strokes and get that liner sinking problem fixed. And then the second part was a cultural transformation, because racing, when it was Mercury Performance Products, was losing money. And everybody in there was all nervous. My God, they're going to kill us. They're going to roll us into mainstream, and we'll be gone. I said, well, I know how to fix it. Well, how do you fix that? Stop losing money.
Yeah.
It's not that big a challenge. If the product quality is good, people will pay for value. Even if it's expensive, it's value if it's not breaking.
Makes sense. Yeah.
We had to do a pretty serious transformation of culture. And there were a few people that were long-term employees that didn't make the cut. And I had to replace them with up talent. I was a firm believer that whenever you have the opportunity, you muscle build the talent in your organization. Get people with bigger brains, better experience, and make it work. And if the guys aren't cutting it, you got to replace them. And I had a couple that I probably kept too long. I had one that actually Pat Mackey said, you got to replace him. And I said, but he knows all these things. He says, yeah, but he's not good. and I started looking at it, and you know what? He's right. He knows a lot of things. He knows a lot of customers, but he's not talented in the places that matter. So he was gone.
Thank our first sponsor of the podcast, Adam Serafine, and he has put together a development in Osage Beach, Missouri called Harper's Cove. Myrick, tell us about that.
Yeah, so we actually went over and checked it out the other day. Lots of waterfront lots, a pool house, big, large dock, community dock that, we'll be able to have a lot of boats down there. And I feel that it's going to be a lot of power boaters that fill this place up, because the people that I've here that are building houses there are all power boaters. So to me, it kind of gives it that guy that wants to have a because there are a lot of lots that are second tier also, but it's that guy that wants to have the lack of maintenance, like a condo kind of feel, because come in, just enjoy your time there, go boating, and leave. And that's what I feel that this property is really doing. I know that there's Rusty's building a house there, which, him being, a really good salesman and a really good taker care of his customers.
Yeah.
I'm sure there will be, and I think there already is. I just don't know off the top of my head names of customers that are building houses in there that are power boaters that are gonna, basically fill those docks up with badass boats, and then being really close to Osage Beach on Case Road, and then being really close to, where the shootout's going to be, being really close to Performance Boat Center. And that's pretty much the beauty of the logistics of that place. And if you were to go there by water, you go back in the cove past Kellysport, which is a no-wake cove. So those people that want to leave their boat in a slip and not worried about it getting rocked all over the place, even if you don't have a lift, that'll be able to happen. So that's what I mean. I live in a small little cove, nothing like the size they're talking about, but the fact that it's no wake is huge on Lake of the Ozarks, because your friends can come over and tie up their boats to your dock and not worrying about a 55 Sea Ray going by and putting it on top of the dock if it isn't positioned correctly. And I know there's a lot of docks that way around the lake, but you definitely don't run into that issue here at Harper's Cove. And and I really appreciate getting some sponsorship from Harper's Cove.
Yep. Thanks, Adam.
Well, that being said, Fred, I mean, you touched on it a second ago, but like during your tenure, what products that you guys developed are you most proud of to this day?
I would have to say that under my tenure, taking the 6 drive, which was the Kiekhaefer drive, and making an M8. That was one I was real happy with. We didn't expect to need it, but the other one I was most proud of was the quad cam 4-valve, that 1350. And when we were developing that, all of a sudden we're blowing up 6 drives.
Yeah.
Oh crap, we didn't expect that. But they were making serious torque, and the 6 drive couldn't handle it. So it wasn't in the budget, but we did it anyway, and we did the M8. We upgraded the quality of the internal components and got it to live. So the M8 and the quad cam 4-valve 9-liter, happy with both of those.
Yeah. Myrick,
And
as a mechanic, what's your take on those products?
They're the best. I mean, I still run, like right now, for example, we have an 1100 on a 6, in our race boat, and knock on wood, we're on our 3rd year with that set of engines without any major failure. And I mean, it's not like we take it easy on them. So,
Right.
well, we designed the 6 drive originally to handle 1,000 horsepower with a little margin. But that's why we blew up so many engines in the 80s trying to get 200 hours. I said, if we don't get 200 hours, we're not introducing it at Miami. It was it was only January, and the boat show was in February, that we actually accumulated the 200 hours. I got pictures of us down in Key Largo with a rubber tree and a chain hoist pulling motors out of the boat.
What engine package were you using? Like a 900 SC or something like that?
Well, we used all different kinds of things. The one that proved to be the most likely to survive long enough was the Gentry turbos. We ran the twin turbo Gentrys. We ran Eicherts. We ran, I think we used 4 or 5 different brands. We had Mel Riggs build us some engines. I mean, we went round and round and round. I don't think we ever put any of the Mercury big, because they were a competitor. We weren't able then.
And for people that don't know, what he's talking about is the similar engine package to what was in the Dirty Duck we went 200 in last time. Even though they were made by Carson Brummett, it still has the manifold style, turbocharged with the boost relief valve right on the manifold, that looks very similar to what Gentry had on his stuff in the late 80s. So it was obviously a good package, to be able to get the heat up and get the turbo spinning.
They were very good, but they weren't always perfect. We got one set of engines that came down to us. We put it in the boat. We hit the starter, and the crank hit the pan. It never made one revolution. So I mean, they had flaws too, and they obviously had never dynoed it, or they would have known that. But on the other hand, we had one of the technicians of the boat, the Scarab that Gentry owned, that leased to Don Johnson. When we were setting that up originally, we weren't getting the power, and we were going, "What's going on? The boat's slower." And I said, "It can't possibly be slower. It's got to be at least as fast as it was with the Mercruiser drives." And I overheard the technician going, "You got to be honest with them. They're going to find out." The engines had less power. So once we got the engines up to the same power they'd run in the boat before, it was 6 miles an hour faster. So come on, guys. We were in a panic. We were in an absolute panic because the damn thing was running slower. But we ended up winning, so it was a good deal.
Yeah. I'd say that in my career of being Marine, you've been a part of a lot of the biggest things for me. The L6, of course, like I mentioned before, the QC4V. Those are the 2 biggest changes that I've ever felt and still use today. I mean, and not necessarily the L6, because the V8 package is good now, but it's just like that was the start of the Mercury 4-stroke that really meant something to me. And yeah, it's powerful. Without those, I don't know, without that Mercury or those packages, I don't even know if I'd be a boat mechanic, boat racer, because it's unbelievable.
Well, without those packages, I probably would have been retired sooner. I had 4 different presidents at Mercury apologize for not spending more time with me at racing. But every one of them said, well, the reality is we didn't have to. And I said, that was my job. My job was to make this a benefit to you, not a problem for you. So if I'm doing my job, you shouldn't have to come visit me. The only time they drove me crazy was every year at budget cycle, because they made me zero base everything every time. And I said, given my track record, give me at least half of it without having to work for it. I'll do the same stuff.
Yeah.
Just make it easier for me to get through this.
So with that being said, Fred, with you being at the top of Mercury Racing, so you're saying you were the one that was always, for lack of a better term, cracking the whip on your guys to come up with more innovative stuff and keep pushing that envelope to the next best thing.
We could see it from our customer base. We knew that marine engines were going to be taxed more because the boats were getting bigger. We knew the automobile industry was under pressure for fuel economy standards to make things smaller and lighter. So we saw the engines getting smaller, our need for engines getting bigger. Sooner or later, there's going to be a point where that crosses over, and we better be ready for it. That's when we decided that we needed to do a bigger engine. We had a false start. We bought the Eagle from Schubeck in Oshkosh, but when we got it and tested it, we discovered we had made a mistake. I ate a lot of crow for that mistake because it was not cheap to unwind, and I felt bad because he had a great little hot rod engine, big hot rod engine, but it wasn't suited to what we did in racing.
And what engine are you talking about right there?
That was he called it the Eagle, I think.
Okay.
It was basically a hot rod engine made like most of the hot rod guys did. They just scaled it up and made it bigger, but it wasn't. It was a hot rod. It wasn't really engineered. And what we learned when we worked on it was that the piston speeds were too high. The durability was not adequate for a marine engine. And by then, there was an engineer that was at Mercury that was getting ready to leave. He always wanted to work for me, but I was never told. Mainstream Engineering wanted to keep him, but he got fed up with it and quit. And I got told about it by one of my friends in Main Engineering. They said, if you can, you try to keep this guy. So I had an exit interview with him and said, if you're going to leave and you find out it's not good where you're going, come back. I'll have a job for you the next day. He goes, you don't know me. No, but I know people who do know you. And they speak of you with such high regard. You come back here, you got a job. That was Eric Christensen. He came back.
Awesome.
He says it was 3 months. I think it was 3 weeks. We've always disagreed about the timeline, but he was the fundamental instrument behind the QC4 engine. We had another guy, Glenn Anderson, who did the cylinder heads, did all the cam layout and things like that. But it was a team effort. But Eric was the instigator of it. I was the guy that got it funded, and it was not an easy job. Because
it's crazy. The other day, I was actually working on a QC4V and a 46 Rough Rider, and we had pulled one of the carbon cowlings off, and it had you had wrote, I don't remember what your quote was, and then your signature was underneath it in silver Sharpie, and it was cool to see that in one of the earlier QC4Vs that's still out there, doing revolutions.
When I put those into production, I always found out who is the final customer for this particular engine set. And every engine that went out, I signed one of them on the back side of that front cover.
Yep.
Just to be a little surprised.
Yeah, you even drew little checker flags.
Yeah. My signature checkered flag. Yeah, that's right. We did a 4-engine, I think it was a Nortec Cat. And I signed that one. Too much is never enough.
Yep. This one was something about sex appeal or something like that, because the cigarette was such a sexy machine kind of thing. It was neat.
I know John Woodruff of Windship fame. He's got one of your signatures, and his guy Tyson showed it to me one time when we were at TIC Files. Like, oh, that's so cool.
All right, so we're here on John Woodruff's MTI, and they have a little surprise to show us.
Signed by the maker.
How did you find that? Did you know it was on there?
No idea until we worked on the boat one day.
Wow. Fred Kiekhaefer himself said, "Torque is like sex, only safer."
Yeah, it is
In
neat.
those days, I knew every customer, every boat they were going in, and I had the styling department do the boat logo for the front cover too. So if it was an MTI, it got an MTI logo. If it was a skater, it got a skater logo. If it was a Nortec, it got a Nortec. And I designed all of the graphics from their graphics. I would take a Photoshop picture, and then I would do the graphics over the front of it. The styling guys would do one-offs.
Yeah, and
for me.
they were like a domed decal too. That
Yep.
I had always thought that it was done by the manufacturer of the boat. I didn't realize that you guys were doing that.
Yeah.
Straight
We
from
did
the
it
factory.
right
That's
out.
pretty cool. Yeah.
And I did have, a little bit of a swallow your pride moment on a couple of those, because Skater had always used competitors' engines
Mm-hmm.
until the QC4 was so successful they had no choice. The customers were demanding them. And I made a Skater logo. But I got to tell you, I had to talk to myself to do that, because I wanted to do a special logo for them, but I didn't. I was basically a single digit logo,
Yeah.
But
I get it.
and I also had DCB. They were so big with Teague. Oh, you gotta let no. Your customer wants our engines. Teague can suffer. I'm sorry. Nice guy, love him like a brother. Happy to teach him how to rebuild them, and he can be a service. But no, our engine's going in the boat if the customer wants it. Had a little trouble being willing to put those 1350s in a 30-foot DCB.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little worried they were going to be overpowered, but
Yeah, M31.
they made it work, and they did it
Yeah.
pretty well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my favorite was Johnny Tomlinson at the first time he ran the engines in Key West. And somebody, may have been you, Ray, I can't remember. Somebody asked him, well, what are you going to do after the first race to get ready for the second race? We'll put some gas in the boat and probably check the oil. I could have kissed him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was really pleasant to hear. You
Yeah.
can't buy marketing like that.
Oh,
No, especially
exactly. And
from
I
a guy
was
like that.
Johnny's crew chief forever, probably 8 years, and it was all big PSI blower Sterling stuff. And I worked like I don't know how many hours just doing anything that I could to keep them together for a race, let alone races plural.
Well, and then on the poker runs, we used to take bets. They have the Four Horsemen or whatever it is, the one on Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin, and of course the Sterlings and other brands, big blower motors. We'd always take wagers among ourselves. Will they make it to the inlet on Lake Winnebago, or will the hatch go up before the inlet? And it was pretty much even money. I usually said, they'll not get to the inlet. I think I won at least 50% of the wagers. So, it makes you feel pretty good when you, again, back to delivering value. When you can put something out there that works.
Yeah.
And I had one customer that, and I'll leave the names out of it and I'll leave the brands out of it, but he switched from big blower motors to our QC4s. And he goes, I used to be so thankful when I got back to the marina after a day of boating. And now he says, I'm thankful at the end of the season to get back. He says, I never got more than 20 hours out of the blower motor. And he says, I got 200 hours on these and I haven't touched them. Yeah. That makes you feel pretty good.
I bet. So Fred, despite, the rough upbringing by Carl Kiekhaefer and your dad, and if you had to do it over, would you follow the same path?
Well, I got to say that every step along the way, I learned things. I actually think even the time that I spent in the medical equipment business, that helped prepare me for my time at Price Waterhouse, because now I knew GMP, good manufacturing practices, which was a requirement for medical devices and medical equipment. And if I hadn't learned that, I wouldn't have been on the group that put together the business systems for a contact lens company that was a startup. and we
Yeah.
did all the information systems and all the compliance systems. And if I hadn't had the background in medical equipment, I wouldn't have had the knowledge to be able to help them put together their production processes. And
Yeah.
I learned so much doing production processes that when I had my own company, I could see what needed fixing. And so
Yeah.
every step along the way, I learned something that was valuable. And sometimes you don't even know that you're preparing. But
Right.
I always say when preparation meets opportunity, that's when things happen. I mean, I
Yeah.
look back at my youth, rigging race boats prepared me to be able to rig snowmobiles.
Mhm.
Snowmobile engines prepared me to be able to do two strokes or at least
Yeah.
understand them. Even though I was no longer hands-on engineering when I was at Mercury, I knew enough that they couldn't bullshit me.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of what you're saying hits home with me. You're at a different level through, different things, but I look back and everybody goes, how'd you learn what you do? And I was like, a lot of retention of being taught different things. You retain that knowledge and you use it different applications, from being a swimming pool installer to being a guy wiring a grain elevator to then going to tech school and learning about an engine and then seeing the boat and learning about the plumbing system and the electrical system and all this stuff coming together and has to be one final package. And, through all of these different jobs and all of these different things that you learn from, you might get an old guy that's, on his way out, but if you can learn one thing from that guy and retain it, it's the most invaluable information that you can
Yeah,
hold on
I
to.
look along the way, and especially applaud those who were my mentors,
Yeah,
because you learn by your own effort, but you're
Mhm.
guided in that path by someone who's been there or knows more. I mean, I
Exactly.
came out of the Florida school system as a kid going to college. When I got in my freshman year, I discovered people in Wisconsin and the school up there are smarter than the people, or at least more knowledgeable,
Mhm.
more capable than people who came out of the Florida public school system. And I was in a panic because my first semester at Ripon College, I sucked. But the school was small enough, and there was a professor who cared enough to say, "You're not meeting your potential. I want you to get a tutor. Here's a guy that can help you." And Tim Willing, I still remember his name, and I looked him up a few years ago to see if he was still around because I wanted to tell him what he did for me. But he
Wow.
taught me to think. He brought my brain. We'd do mock exams, and he'd say, "What are you thinking right now? Stop. What are you thinking right now?" "That's stupid. Why aren't you? Here's what you've already learned. Why aren't you using that?" And over the course of time, I took a D average at midterms. And by the time I finished, I was a physics major with a 3.0. Not a
Mhm.
4.0, but it was a 3.0. And given where I started, that's about all. Actually, I think it was a 3.2. It's about all I could hope for.
Yeah.
So he was, Dr. Zay was the first guy that helped me because he recognized I was struggling. And Tim was the guy that taught me to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course, working in the summers with my dad's assistants, I ended up in a summer internship at Mercury Engineering doing
Yeah.
engineering stuff. And I ended up on the snowmobile engine team. And the
It's
snowmobile
cool.
engine team, even though I was forced to use outboard parts, which was a compromise, not proud of that first engine. I mean, it ran and it developed the power it needed to, but I was not happy with it. So when I
Yeah.
got the clean slate, I already had that background. When I got the clean slate or a Marine working for my dad, I could do good engines. And
Yep.
there, he had brought over a guy from Mercury who was a nice German fella who was a master of loop charge two strokes. So he was my second mentor. And he's the guy that
Mhm.
got me started in my two stroke loop stuff. So everywhere
Yeah.
along the way, you get a mentor that helps you. When I joined
Yep.
Price Waterhouse, my first mentor was right there in the Boston office. But I ended up
Yeah.
working for the guy in New York who was my second mentor. And then Paris was my third. If I had it to do again and I didn't have the opportunity that I got when my father passed, I would have stayed in consulting because I loved it. I was having a ball. And the
Yeah.
companies that I helped, they did really well with what I did. And it makes you feel good. When I started with this contact lens company, there were 3 employees. the CFO, the president, and one technical guy. When I left, there were 200, and they were government approved to produce for consumption.
Wow.
All my information systems feeding that.
Well, it's got to make you feel good, Fred, that your name is synonymous with Mercury Racing and high performance boating across the world. And I, for one, thank you and your dad for what you guys have done to this industry. Myrick and I wouldn't have a job, if it weren't for what you guys have come up with and keeping us on the water and getting off the trailer and back on.
You would have a job. It would just be a different job.
Something different job, yeah.
Well, I'm real happy with the results I've had. I'm happiest most with the culture and the people that I groomed into positions where they are today.
Yeah.
Because when it comes right down to it, it's all about the quality of the people and the fun in our industry, the fun you can provide to our customers.
No question.
And it's the work that you do, Ray. It helps to communicate the joy of our industry, and it all matters. The stuff that Stu Jones did with Florida Powerboat Club, I applaud him because he gets people excited to put their boats in the water and race off and do silly things.
Yeah,
it's it's a fun industry, and it's just so rewarding to contribute to the joy that people have.
Yeah. Because
first of all, we're all lucky just to be here. I mean, think about the odds.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot.
My parents survived World War II.
Yeah.
My mom agreed to get laid, and I'm the baby.
Yeah.
Okay.
The odds right there.
Yeah. The sperm that met the egg, a healthy birth on this little blue marble that circles the sun in a galaxy. I mean, look at the statistical odds of any of us on this planet being there.
Yeah.
And
we're all lotto winners.
And we're all sitting here in the United States, the best place on the planet to be a citizen.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Thank you every day. Yeah. Thank you.
For sure. Well, thank you, Fred, for joining us. This has been 90 minutes of just talking with you, and we could probably listen to you for forever. So
I can make up stuff for a long time.
Thank you so much for your time for coming on board. Myrick, good seeing you. This has been another episode of the Boats and Bros podcast with the one and only Fred Kiekhaefer. And please remember to like, subscribe, and share the Boats and Bros podcast. And we will see you on the next one. Fred, thank you so much for your time. Myrick.
Thank you, Ray.
See you, bro.
Myrick, good to see you.
Thanks, Fred.
This podcast is powered by Speedboat Magazine. Subscribe now at speedboat.com for 9 power-packed current issues a year direct to your mailbox.